B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins News and Comment. It's Wednesday, December 20th, 2017. This is my last scheduled News and Comment podcast for the year, but I will break away from my holiday vacation and return to the microphone if conditions warrant. There are a lot of rumors circulating about what may happen later this week as Congress winds down, tries to pass a spending bill, and we'll see if that is successful or if they just punt into the new year. And in a bit, I'm going to recommend some of my favorite podcast interviews from this past year for your listening pleasure in case you miss them along the way and you've got extra time during the holiday break. But we begin with the travesty from Washington, D.C. A dismal year ends with the passage of these abysmal tax cuts for corporations and the most wealthy Americans. And it has been stunning to see how the Republicans, like crackheads, have just been determined to ram this baby through, irrespective of its economic impact, who it harms. Most of the senators and members of Congress have not even read the final bill. It is an incredible exercise in recklessness and irresponsibility. And that's not just me talking. Jeff Bezos, the billionaire Amazon founder who now owns the Washington Post, I don't believe he wrote this editorial, but his newspaper says that this passage is a win for the wealthy, the entitled, and the irresponsible, and that this will be remembered as an ignominious moment for Republicans. Now, I agree with much of what this editorial says, even though I find the Washington Post is often way off base. The editorial says the bill is a victory for wealthy heirs who no longer will have to pay estate taxes on inherited worth up to $22 million. It helps tax dodgers and their lawyers, who will have some potentially huge new loopholes to exploit. And because the drafting process was so hasty and sloppy, no doubt there are many hidden in the text that even its authors do not realize are there. The bill is also a win for non-transparent government. Yeah, this was all done outside of the view of the public or the minority Democrats. The editorial continues, the bill is a victory for the discredited theory of trickle-down economics. It's a win for know-nothing anti-intellectualism. At every stage, Republicans have ignored or attacked independent experts, warning them that their bill is unwise. And when the scorekeepers presented scores they didn't like, they just ignored it. The bill is a victory for corrosive partisanship. Republicans could have hashed out a better bipartisan plan, but they never seriously tried. Instead, they added to the bill a stealth repeal of a key piece of Obamacare and a provision allowing drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Most of all, though, the bill is a victory for fiscal irresponsibility. It'll make the nation's debt trajectory even worse by $1 trillion+, even after accounting for the projected, but not guaranteed, economic growth. And in an op-ed at today's New York Times, Will Wilkinson, I've never heard of him before, he is the vice president for policy at the Niskanen Center. I've never heard of that either. But his words resonate with me. He says this bill is an exercise in mercenary cupidity. And he quotes Jesse Jackson. This is a brazen expression of money power, an example of American plutocracy, a government of the wealthy, by the wealthy, for the wealthy. And Wilkinson continues, in its great haste, the world's greatest deliberative body held no hearings or debate on tax reform. The Senate's Republicans made sloppy math mistakes, crossed out and rewrote whole sections of the bill by hand at the 11th hour, and forced a vote on it before anyone could conceivably read it. The link between the heedlessly negligent style and anti-redistributive substance of recent Republican lawmaking is easy to overlook. The key is the libertarian idea, woven into the right's ideological DNA, that redistribution is the exploitation of the makers by the rest of us, the takers. And it follows that democracy, which enables and legitimizes this exploitation, is itself an engine of injustice from the view of the wealthy and propertied class. And he says that given the urgency of this struggle, the Republicans are not about to be tender with the niceties of democratic deliberation and regular parliamentary order. The idea that there is an inherent tension between democracy and the integrity of property rights is wildly misguided, he says. The liberal democratic state is a relatively recent historical innovation, and our best accounts of the transition from autocracy to democracy points to the role of democratic political inclusion in protecting property rights. But the peasants really don't know what's best for the country. You got to leave it to the wealthy, the corporate elite, because they know what's best for themselves, and they imagine that everybody else will benefit if they do. And Wilkinson continues in a quote from political scientists Ansel and Samuels: the demand for political inclusion generally isn't driven by a desire to use the existing institutions to plunder the elites. It's driven by a desire to keep the elites from continuing to plunder us. And he closes with this: at a time when America's faith in democracy is flagging, the Republicans elected to treat the U.S. Senate, the citizens it represents, with all the respect college guys accord public restrooms. It's easier to, I don't know where that comes from. It's easier to reverse a bad piece of legislation than the bad reputation of our representative institutions, which is why the way the bill was passed is probably worse than what's in it. I'm not sure I agree, because I think the long-term economic effects will be highly destructive, and they will only exacerbate the wide gulf between the rich and poor in this country. And finally, he says the Republican majority is bulldozing through basic democratic norms as though freedom has everything to do with the tax code and democracy just gets in the way. And Ted Cruz, the arrogant son of a bitch from Texas, he couldn't help but rub it in, because this is a partisan tax plan. The blue states that didn't support Trump and that don't have generally Republican governors and or one-party rule, California, New York, New Jersey, and Illinois, they are the wealthy states that will pay more because of the loss of the tax deduction, the limitations on mortgage interest deduction. It's going to hurt a whole lot of people. But that doesn't stop these people from lying big time. Cruz said in a floor speech on the Senate last night, the only people whose taxes are going up are the really rich. The middle class, their taxes are all going down. The working class, their taxes are going down. Every taxpayer, their taxes are going down, Cruz said, except rich people in Manhattan and San Francisco. Some of them, their taxes may go up. Well, it's not just rich people. If you make more than $50,000 and you use Schedule A to itemize deductions, or you have in the past, you are likely to face a higher tax bill in the coming years. And the arrogance and the contempt for what's left of our democratic institutions also infects the Republicans at the state level. A report from the Associated Press today recounts how South Dakota voters worked to approve a ballot measure last year tightening campaign contribution limits and creating a government ethics watchdog. But the Republican majority in the legislature quickly torched the new rules and instead are seeking changes that would make it far tougher for residents to use the initiative process at all. Legislatures from Dakotas to Maine brushed aside voter measures, some working to hamper citizens' ability to pass future ballot questions. In 2018 and beyond, states including Ohio, Maine, Missouri, and the Dakotas could tussle over the access to the ballot by average citizens. Trump doesn't believe much in democracy, at least not at the United Nations. And like a kindergarten teacher, Nikki Haley, our ambassador, has been instructed to take names of the nations that participated in the 14-0 vote at the Security Council. I mean, we know who those nations are. I don't think we need to make a list. Many of them are our allies, nominally, like Britain and France and Germany. Japan, Italy. They all voted in unison to reject Trump's call, his recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Israel. And school marm Nikki Haley said she'll be taking names of countries that vote for the General Assembly resolution tomorrow that is critical of the decision by Trump. And so Trump is threatening to bolt from the UN if he can't have his way. He's threatening to cut off American funding. We'll save a lot. We don't care, he said, with his arrogant, autocratic tendencies. This isn't like it used to be, where they could vote against you and then you pay them hundreds of millions of dollars. We're not going to be taken advantage of any longer. But what about the Palestinians who continue to be taken advantage of by the State of Israel and its American enablers? Aren't they tired of being taken advantage of? I'm certainly tired of seeing that. Trump lost another nominee to his wrecking crew. This is a guy dedicated to dismantling the Export-Import Bank. And I'm not totally opposed to making changes in the Export-Import Bank. It is a sop to big American corporations. It helps countries from other parts of the world borrow money to buy American products. It is a form of corporate welfare. And again, if people want to take a methodical and reasonable approach to reforming or ending the Export-Import Bank, I can entertain that. But Trump had nominated a former Republican Congressman, Scott Garrett from New Jersey, who has blathered in the past about dismantling the Ex-Im Bank. And surprisingly, 2 Republican senators joined all the Democrats on the committee yesterday, and they rejected his nomination. Nice to see, but it's a pretty fringe issue, and we don't see the Republicans, aside from Senator Kennedy of Louisiana, really confronting some of these sorry, sad sacks that Trump has nominated. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And I've got a fresh list here. People like Joe Clarici, Brian Wilcuts, Brian Mazzy. And this is my last invitation of the year to you to become a subscriber to the Peter B. Collins Podcast. All you have to do is visit peterbcollins.com, find the menu button, click, pull it down, find Become a Subscriber, click, takes you to the sign-up page. You've got choices, $5, $10, $20 a month, the $50 annual subscription, our app for the iPad and iPhone that's available at the Apple App Store. These are all the ways that you can support me, and I hope you'll choose one and be particularly generous here at the holiday season. And if you'd like to drop a check in the mail or even a $20 bill, we don't reject it. You can mail any correspondence to the Peter B. Collins Show at Box 150-660, San Rafael, California, zip code 94915. That's P.O. Box 150-660, San Rafael, 94915, Box 150-660. You got it? San Rafael, 94915. And here's where I want to invite you to spend some of your free time during the holiday break to catch up on some of the great podcast interviews that I conducted over the past year. And I made a short list here. I'm just going to run them down for you. Nancy McLean is the impressive author who exposed the history of the Koch brothers and the libertarian movement in this country. I did a 3-part series unintentionally about the cover-up of sex scandals at the Air Force Academy, starting with Teresa Beasley, then former cadet Eric Thomas, and then former investigator Brandon Enos. They're all available for you at peterbcollins.com. And by the way, on the left margin of the homepage of the website, it's very easy to access the archives from the past year. It's divided by months. All you got to do is click on February, and you'll find the interview podcasts that are posted there. Also, I'm very proud of the work I did on the Russiagate scandal with skeptics, including the well-informed Bill Binney, Bob Perry, the amazing journalist from ConsortiumNews.com, Dan Kovalik, who wrote the book about Russiagate, and Greg Palast, who says that asking him to talk about it may end his career. Catch those interviews. My first interview post-release of Don Siegelman, the former governor of Alabama, railroaded into prison by friends of Karl Rove, and who was released from custody on the same day that his nemesis, Jeff Sessions, was confirmed as Attorney General. Several interviews with Trevor Aronson, who has exposed the FBI's participation in frame-up investigations of so-called domestic terrorism suspects, and Bo Hodai, the independent journalist who's based in Arizona, who did a great expose on a case there. Thomas Frank, who still owes me $5 for my prediction that Trump would win, gave a couple of great interviews over the past year. I'm particularly impressed by, the chance to meet Ai Weiwei and share a conversation with that Chinese dissident and activist. Several interviews with Norman Solomon, including the most recent about the Democratic Unity Commission. Andrew Bacevich, the best-positioned critic of America's war and foreign policy today. Dennis Kucinich, the former congressman. John Kiriakou, both individually and with his co-author, Joe Hickman. Peter Van Buren, the former State Department officer and whistleblower, whose book Hooper's War is about moral injury, a very powerful topic. Tom Drake and Rocky Anderson, who blew the whistle on the total surveillance of Salt Lake City during the Olympics there a decade or so ago. And Pete McCloskey, my longtime friend, the former Republican presidential candidate back in 1968, who served in Korea and gave a very powerful interview about the prospects of a new war on the Korean Peninsula. Those are all great interviews. They're free, unrestricted, available to you at peterbcollins.com, so go get them. Put on your earbuds and enjoy. Before Congress convenes, before Congress, you can see I'm running out of gas here. It's been a long year and a tough one. Anyway, before Congress adjourns, they have many unfinished tasks, and many may remain unfinished. One of them is the demand by the government that they extend the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the FISA law, including its problematic Section 702, which is supposed to be about intercepting foreigners' communications, only when Americans are involved, they listen anyway. And I rarely agree with the Freedom Caucus of the House, these right-wing nuts, but on the issue of domestic surveillance, we're on the same side. And Mark Meadows, the Neanderthal from North Carolina, he is threatening to hold up any effort for a reauthorization without amendments. Devin Nunes, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Republican from California, wants an 8-year extension with no changes. Thanks, Devin. I really appreciate that. Also, House committees are demanding more interviews with top FBI officials, and their goal is to expose wrongdoing in the Clinton email investigation. And as you know, I believe that the Clinton email imbroglio deserves investigation, but not a partisan witch hunt by Trey Benghazi Gowdy, who now runs the House Oversight Committee. He has joined with Bob Goodlatte, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, asking to interview more FBI officials. They spent 8 hours grilling Andrew McCabe, the deputy director of the FBI, yesterday. And again, I believe that there are issues that deserve to be exposed. And the recent disclosure of the emails between Peter Strzok and his paramour, it turns out that Strzok is married, so it is an extramarital affair with Lisa Page. Anyway, you know, their exchange raises some questions that should be explored. But by Trey Gowdy, I don't have any confidence in his impartiality. Over at Shadowproof, where Kevin Gosztola has done a great job establishing a new independent media outlet, he focuses on the new investigation into Jill Stein and alleged collusion with Russians. Huh? I mean, this is such a joke. Jill Stein was the Green Party candidate. There's one picture of her sitting at a table in Moscow where Mike Flynn is actually sitting next to Putin and Stein is across the table. She got a handshake and a brief comment from Putin, but never really talked to him. But that doesn't stop the delusional Clinton loyalists who want to come up with anybody to blame except for Hillary for the loss last year. And now they're piling on to Jill Stein and hoping that this investigation turns up some sort of dirt. But first, Jill Stein's comment. We strongly support legitimate inquiry into any illegal activity in our elections, including quid pro quo deals, money laundering, corruption, violation of campaign finance laws. At the same time, we caution against the politicization, sensationalism, and collapse of journalistic standards that has plagued media coverage of the investigation. In the current climate of attacks on our civil liberties, with the emergence of censorship in social media and the press, criminalization of protest, militarization of police, and massive expansion of the surveillance state, we must guard against the potential for these investigations to be used to intimidate and silence principled opposition to the political establishment. Now that's a mouthful, but Jill Stein really said it all. So Gostola points out that over at Think Progress, Center for American Progress, run by Neera Tanden, formerly run by John Podesta, way in the tank for Hillary, they published a piece which had some inaccuracies. Quote, Stein said she attended the 2015 dinner to talk about achieving peace in the Middle East. She told Democracy Now!, however, that she wasn't able to discuss the region with Putin because there was no interpreter at the table. It's unclear who paid for Stein's trip to Russia. No, it's not. Stein paid for it. Mike Flynn took the freebie. And they say Stein has ducked questions about the matter. And that is hardly the case. So Think Progress did print a correction, and then they published a post entitled The Pro-Kremlin Talking Points of Jill Stein. And Zach Petkanis, the rapid response director for the Clinton campaign last year, giddily typed, Jill Stein is a Russian agent 8 times on Twitter. Isn't that swell? And he also said she played a big role in electing Putin's favorite candidate, Donald Trump. And, of course, this is just desperation on the part of people who hope that scrutiny of Hillary Clinton doesn't go any further. But that may happen. Tom Frank, who still owes me $5 over our bet that Trump would win, has his last column of the year in The Guardian today. It's a good one. I've linked to it in the show file for today's podcast. He interviewed Donna Brazile, and he notes that after her book, she has succeeded in pissing off every last group of the country's political spectrum. From Sanders supporters to Clinton supporters to Trump supporters. Brazile's present offense, says Frank, is that her book reveals an arrangement between the Clinton campaign and the DNC that effectively gave the campaign control over the party apparatus well before Clinton became the party's official nominee. Brazile has given serious substantiation, in other words, to the charge that Sanders and his followers threw at the Democratic Party that the process was rigged. Members of the Pundit Bureau blasted Sanders last year for suggesting such a thing. Now they're blasting Brazile for confirming it. They vituperate, even though what she and Sanders have said is, true. He goes on to say Brazile wanted Hillary Clinton to be president, worked hard to achieve that, but she also thinks Clinton and her team blundered repeatedly. This feels like common sense to me, but in the Republic of the Righteous, it is a brain-stopping contradiction. It may not be uttered. He quotes Brazile, Hillary got the vast majority of votes, but if her campaign would have just had 1 ounce of passion, 1 ounce of energy, and not just relied on the old guard to bring out the new vote, she'd be president today. But the fact that they took these states for granted, Donald Trump didn't need to pick the lock. He could break the firewall simply by showing up. And here's another quote. Brazile tells of struggling with DNC staffers who were double agents for the Clinton campaign. She recalls how undercover right-wing operatives infiltrated and embarrassed a liberal group. She describes in detail how the DNC removed sinister malware and spyware from its computers, then, failing the first time, how they had to do it all over again. Now, Frank doesn't go into Russiagate. He doesn't express his own view on that, and he doesn't talk about the domestic influences on voter suppression and other ways that the election was rigged for Trump. Still, I think it's a worthwhile read, so check it out. And over at consortiumnews.com, Norman Solomon, who I mentioned, we've got a great interview that's up at peterbcollins.com with Solomon about the Democratic Unity Reform Conference. But he turns to his original calling as the author of the book War Made Easy, How Presidents and Pundits Keep Spinning Us to Death. And he warns you about the holiday blockbuster film from Steven Spielberg starring Meryl Streep. It's called The Post, all about the Washington Post and its publisher, Katharine Graham. And while Solomon does give credit to Graham for the courage she showed in publishing the Pentagon Papers, he notes that the book is based on her autobiography and that there's a lot that was left out there, including her coziness with figures like Henry Kissinger and Robert McNamara, related to the Vietnam War. And Solomon notes that she has more vitriol for the people who ran the printing presses at the Washington Post, who went on strike and did some damage to printing equipment. But Solomon notes it's a profound commentary on her outlook, that thuggish deeds by a few of the strikers were unforgivable, but men like McNamara and Kissinger were lovable after they oversaw horrendous slaughter in Southeast Asia. Couple of items here before I wrap up. A Florida judge, just in the nick of time, halted the deportation, or the second attempt at deportation, of 92 Somalis from the United States. The bungled attempt about a week ago left them sitting on the tarmac in Senegal for something like 46 hours. They were subjected to great heat, weren't allowed to use the bathroom, and the inhumane conditions led this judge to order a delay in their deportation for at least 2 weeks. Another judge in Las Vegas has issued a mistrial, declared a mistrial, in the case of Cliven Bundy, his sons Ammon and Ryan, and longtime supporter Ryan Payne. This goes back to the original occupation by the Bundys of federal land back in, about 2014? And the mistrial was declared because of improper behavior by the prosecutors. They failed to meet evidence deadlines at least 7 times. They didn't share information that the judge considered to be exculpatory and substantive. And this is the second time that the Bundys have won over their, the standoff in Oregon at the Malheur Wildlife Refuge led to complete acquittals. And I don't support the Bundys, and I actually, don't believe they have a reasonable claim. But we've seen overreach by the FBI and by federal prosecutors, and I don't support that, even with odious people like the Bundys. Uber, based here in San Francisco, has just suffered another big setback. The company is on the short end of a ruling by the top court of the European Union. And you probably know that Uber claims that it's not really a taxi service, it's just an app, and it enables people who want to drive to connect with people who need a ride. But everybody knows it is in direct competition with regulated taxi companies. And the European Union has recognized that, and this creates a huge problem for the business model of Uber, which has already been booted from London. At least they're fighting it, but the order has been given. Another court decision, a 3-judge panel, has declined to certify the recount of a House race today, saying that a questionable ballot should be counted in favor of the Republican, and it turns the race in Virginia for a congressional seat into a tie. Now, I have issues about this. I haven't seen the ballot in question, but it was rejected during the first 5-hour recount on Tuesday, and it contained a mark for both candidates. And in most election jurisdictions, if you do that, it's considered a spoiled ballot. But the judges looked at it and they said, well, they see the intent of the voter was to change his or her mind from the Democrat to the Republican. Unless there is a further recount demanded, this tie will be resolved by a coin toss. Here in California, there's a new study conducted by Kaiser Permanente that suggests that exposure to cell phones, wireless networks, and other forms of radiation leads to higher rates of miscarriage. Now, I don't want to sound some kind of a three-stage alarm here, but this is alarming information. And I won't go into all the details of the study, but 453 women who were pregnant were monitored, and those who had the highest exposure to EMFs, electromagnetic fields, were 2.72 times as likely to miscarry. Another court ruling, a federal judge last week blocked the Trump administration rules that made it easier for employers to claim a religious exemption in order to deny insurance coverage of contraceptives for women. This is at least a momentary victory over the claims that corporations can have religious values. It's really insulting and insidious. But this is pandering by Trump and other right-wingers to the evangelical community. And in the lawsuit filed by the state of Pennsylvania, the judge said the rules would cause irreparable harm because tens of thousands of women would lose contraceptive coverage. Bernard Law, a cardinal in the Roman Catholic Church who presided over Boston for many years, also presided over a massive cover-up of pedophile crimes committed by priests under his control. He then colluded with the Pope at the time, Benedict, to cover up these issues, and Benedict was also directly involved before he became Pope in suppressing the reports of misbehavior, criminal behavior, by members of the world's oldest and most corrupt international fraternity. Well, friends, that's it. And I wish I could end on a happy note, some kind of inspiration, something optimistic and positive. But it's been a really crappy year. A lot of people have been hurt, not only by natural disasters like hurricanes and wildfires, but by the intentional actions of fellow human beings. And as I wind down this year, I'm exhausted. I'm spent. I'm emotionally drained. But I commit to you that I'm going to recharge during the holidays. I will be back with news early in the year about some changes here at the podcast, about some new outlets, or at least one new outlet that I'm going to be doing interviews for. And I hope that I can continue to provide interesting, provocative commentary. But I just have to say it isn't easy. And we all face this same struggle. And I hope you will continue to join me in this podcast community as we continue to fight for basic justice, fundamental fairness, and the rights of every individual. Thanks for listening all the way to the bitter end. This is where I tell you that this podcast is free, so you can share it, and it's available on YouTube. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.